The first sign that something was wrong was the pain. The second was the sudden shift in Courtroom 9's environmental system. I stood alone at the center of the defense dock, surrounded by rising tiers of polished black marble, bulletproof acoustic glass, and more dominant alphas than any unmated Omega should ever have to face in a single lifetime. Above me, hanging from the vaulted ceiling of the High Tribunal of Sovereign Jurisprudence, 3 massive holographic displays projected the forensic access logs of Bennett Aerospace Consolidated. Every restricted line of code, every encrypted subroutine, and every classified propulsion blueprint from the last 3 years was splayed out for the entire city to see. For 4 weeks, Prosecutor Alistair Thorne had been building a case to end my career. At 26, I was the youngest lead biometric architect and cryptographic auditor ever hired to design the city's defense orbital grid. If Thorne succeeded today, my independent research firm would be dissolved, my assets would be seized by the Bennett family estate, and I would be placed under a court-mandated alpha conservatorship. In our world, an Omega deemed unstable or criminal was stripped of legal personhood. Failure was not just a professional disaster, it was the loss of my entire life. The prosecution has demonstrated clear evidence of data exfiltration, Prosecutor Thorne announced, his voice carrying through the chamber's acoustic channels. He was a tall, immaculate alpha with silver-streaked hair, expensive tailored robes, and the absolute arrogance of a man who believed the law existed only to serve his pedigree. These proprietary quantum security keys could only have been decrypted using the biometric authorization of Dr. Alira Vance. Around the circular gallery, hundreds of high-ranking delegates, corporate executives, and media correspondents leaned forward. In the front row of the private viewing gallery sat Lord Sean Bennett, the billionaire alpha patriarch who had tried to force me into a contract mating 3 months ago. When I had rejected his proposal and resigned from his firm, he had promised I would leave his empire with nothing. Today, he was trying to collect on that threat. I kept my spine straight. I did not fidget. I did not touch the wooden railing of the dock. I looked directly toward the elevated dais, where the 3 high archons of the tribunal sat in silent authority. The prosecution's argument rests on a fundamental technical impossibility, I said, my voice projecting clearly through the defense microphone. If the court examines time-stamped marker 47, you will observe that the biometric authorization packet uses an asynchronous 16-node cipher. The Bennett Aerospace internal server operates strictly on a synchronous quantum network. Whoever copied my credentials copied my key structure, but failed to replicate the live quantum pulse. Several technical assessors in the gallery began whispering. I clicked the handheld interface, bringing up a side-by-side comparison of the network packets. I am not asking this court to believe my word, I continued. I am demonstrating that the record before you is an engineered duplicate. Prosecutor Thorne's jaw tightened. Across the aisle, Sean Bennett stopped smiling. That was the exact moment the first cramp hit. It struck low in my abdomen, sharp, burning, and violently unnatural. My breath caught in my throat, but I forced my facial muscles to remain completely motionless. I had spent 8 years learning how to mask every physical vulnerability. 8 years of scheduled clinical suppressants, prescription medical blockers, subdermal monitoring implants, and private health records stored on encrypted offline drives. My natural heat cycle was not due for another 2 months. It was biologically impossible for it to begin today. I continued speaking, keeping my cadence even. Furthermore, the access tunnel was routed through an external gateway, registered to a shell company known as Apex Logistics. Beneath my left collarbone, the tiny subdermal scent blocker gave a sharp, rapid vibration. Warning: chemical suppression failure. Reservoir empty. My heart slammed against my ribs. I had replaced the medical cartridge that morning before leaving my apartment. A fresh 6-month clinical seal. It could not be empty. A second cramp tore through my lower stomach, stronger than the first, sending a wave of fever straight up my spine. The holographic text in front of my eyes blurred for a fraction of a second. I pressed my knuckles against the cold stone surface of the defense desk, grounding myself through the chill of the marble. In the front row, Sean Bennett's head snapped up. His nostrils flared. He had caught something. Just a trace, but in a pressurized courtroom filled with dominant alphas, a single molecule of unmasked omega pheromones was like blood in black water. I lowered my left hand beneath the edge of the podium and activated my diagnostic compad. The screen flickered to life, displaying my blood analysis in real time. Chemical suppression level, 0%. Active synthetic accelerant detected. Compound 44B. My blood turned to ice. Someone had not simply drained my blocker. They had replaced my morning maintenance dose with an illegal, fast-acting hormonal accelerant designed to trigger a sudden, uncontrollable heat response within hours of ingestion. On the courtroom's central monitoring screen, a sudden red indicator flashed. Emergency environmental alert. Pheromone threshold fluctuation detected in Sector 4. The murmur in the gallery died instantly. The silence that followed was suffocating. Prosecutor Thorne took a slow step toward the defense dock, a predatory gleam replacing his former frustration. "Your Honors," he called out, his voice rich with simulated concern. "It appears the defendant is experiencing acute biological distress. Under Section 12 of the Jurisprudence Code, an omega undergoing unsuppressed heat in a public tribunal is deemed legally incapacitated. I request an immediate cessation of proceedings and the transfer of Dr. Vance into protective alpha custody." Sean Bennett stood from his seat in the gallery, straightening his jacket. "My security team is fully prepared to provide medical escort and secure holding facilities for my former employee." 2 armed bailiffs moved toward my dock. "Stand down," I commanded. My voice was tight, but it did not waver. "I am an independent sovereign citizen. I refuse custody." "Dr. Vance is not in a condition to refuse," Thorne sneered, stepping closer. "Her scent is already compromising the impartiality of this chamber." My blocker vibrated a final time and went dead. The scent hit the chamber like an uncoiling spring. It was not faint anymore. It was warm, sweet, smelling of crushed white lilies, cedar, and summer rain. The distinct, undeniable scent of an unmated omega in acute chemical heat. Dozens of alphas in the courtroom stood up at once. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with predatory instinct and aggressive tension. Sean Bennett reached the low partition separating the gallery from the well of the court. "Elira," he said, his voice dropping into that dark, possessive tone I despised. "Let me help you. You have nowhere else to go." "Take one more step toward this dock," I said through gritted teeth, "and I will have you cited for contempt." "You don't have the authority to cite anyone, little bird," Bennett whispered, reaching for the gate latch. Through the fever haze, I caught the defense chronometer glowing at the edge of my vision. Exactly 5 minutes had passed since my diagnostic compad first identified compound 44B in my bloodstream. Above us, a sound like cracking thunder echoed through the vaulted ceiling. The golden gavel of the High Archon struck the obsidian sounding block with enough force to send shockwaves through the chamber's audio feed. "Step away from that gate, Lord Bennett," a voice commanded. The voice was not loud, but it possessed a terrifying absolute gravity that brought every person in the hall to a dead stop. It belonged to Archon Vesper Valerius. She sat at the center of the high bench, dressed in the midnight black robes of the Chief Justice. She was the eldest of the 3 Valerius sisters, an alpha of ancient lineage, known across the sovereign territories as cold, unbribable, and completely untouchable by political influence. Beside her sat Archon Mariah Valerius, the tribunal warden, whose pale gray eyes were fixed on Bennett like twin blades. On Vesper's left sat Archon Calla Valerius, the youngest judge, whose fingers were already moving across the tribunal's master security interface. Bennett froze, his hand hovering over the brass latch. "Your Honor, I was merely offering humanitarian assistance to a vulnerable—" "You were ignoring a direct verbal refusal," Archon Mariah interrupted, her voice dangerously low. She rose from her seat, her towering frame casting a long shadow across the marble floor. And in this court, an uninvited touch is treated as an assault on the bench itself. Calla Valerius entered a triple encrypted command into the master terminal. A harsh, resonant siren sounded through the walls. Emergency Protocol 9 activated. Courtroom sealed. Heavy blast doors of reinforced titanium dropped from the archways, slamming into the marble floor with a deafening crash. The high acoustic glass around the public gallery darkened to opaque obsidian, completely severing the gallery from the well of the court. The air circulation system hissed as medical-grade charcoal scrubbers engaged, instantly filtering the sweet, floral scent from reaching the upper tiers. A fresh 5-minute containment countdown appeared on the glowing brass clock above the bench. 5 minutes until the automated protocol would allow the exterior doors to cycle open for authorized emergency personnel. Inside the well of the court, only 7 people remained. Myself, Prosecutor Thorne, 2 stunned bailiffs, and the 3 Valerius sisters. Sean Bennett was trapped behind the reinforced blackout glass, banging his fists uselessly against the soundproof partition. Prosecutor Thorne took a panicked step backward toward the exit doors. Archon Valerius! This is an unprecedented procedural violation. You cannot lock a public trial for an external consultant. Archon Vespa stood. She did not raise her voice, but the sheer weight of her presence pushed Thorne back another 2 paces. Mr. Thorne, you have 3 seconds to sit at your desk and place your hands flat on the wood, or Warden Mariah will remove you from this room in restraints. Mariah stepped down from the high dais, her polished boots clicking against the marble in a steady, unhurried cadence. She didn't draw a weapon. She didn't need to. Her eyes were dark, dilated slightly by the scent of my distress, but her physical control was absolute. She stopped exactly 10 paces from the defense dock, folding her hands behind her back. Thorne dropped into his chair as if his legs had given out. I gripped the edge of the defense podium, my knuckles turning white. Another wave of fever crashed over me, making my knees tremble. The synthetic accelerant was flooding my bloodstream, tearing through my body's natural defenses with terrifying speed. Every instinct screamed that I was trapped in an enclosed room with 3 of the most powerful alphas in the territory. Archon Calla descended the stairs carrying an emergency medical containment case from the judge's private chambers. She was the warmest of the 3 sisters, with dark auburn hair and perceptive amber eyes, but right now her jaw was set in rigid fury. She stopped beside Mariah, maintaining the exact same 10-pace distance. Dr. Vance, Calla said softly, I have a high-grade neutralizing suppressant cartridge and an emergency clinical stabilizer. May I approach the dock? The question hung in the quiet room. She was an archon of the Sovereign High Court. She had the legal authority to order me restrained, to demand my medical compliance, to assert judicial guardianship, yet she stood 10 feet away, in an empty locked room, waiting for a single word of consent from a trembling Omega. Yes, I whispered. Calla moved forward immediately, her steps light and careful. She did not crowd me. She placed the silver medical kit on the edge of the dock, clicked it open, and turned the sterile display toward me. Scan the batch identification, Calla instructed, her voice calm and steadying. Verify the seal and manufacturer code with your own scanner before anything touches your skin. My hands were shaking so badly that my compad nearly slipped from my grip, but I scanned the cartridge. The green verification light illuminated, pure military-grade neural stabilizer, 0 bonding agents, 0 synthetic hormones. May I administer the dose? Calla asked. Yes, I breathed. The auto-injector pressed against the side of my neck. A cold, sharp sting spread beneath my skin, followed seconds later by a deep, icy relief that began pushing back the searing heat in my veins. The trembling in my limbs slowed, though the exhaustion left me leaning heavily against the podium. Vesper Valerius walked down from the dais. She wore long black gloves and a heavy velvet-trimmed judicial robe. She stopped beside her sisters, her sharp gray eyes sweeping over my face, assessing my pulse, my breathing, and the lingering tension in my shoulders. Who touched your medication this morning, Dr. Vance? Vesper asked. I loaded the cartridge myself at 6 in the morning, I said, forcing my mind to focus through the lingering fog. From a fresh box delivered to my apartment yesterday. Delivered by whom? Mariah asked, her voice like grinding stone. The Tribunal Courier Service, I replied. It carried an official court registry stamp. Vesper turned her gaze toward Prosecutor Thorne. The man looked as though he wished the marble floor would swallow him whole. Mr. Thorne, Vesper said, her tone deceptively mild. The Tribunal Courier Service operates under the direct administrative oversight of the Chief Prosecutor's Office. I know nothing about her deliveries, Thorne stammered, raising his hands. Dr. Vance is a reckless contractor. She probably miscalculated her own dosage under the pressure of cross-examination. Her dosage was not miscalculated, Calla said, holding up the handheld diagnostic reader that had linked to my implant. Her bloodstream contains 70 milligrams of compound 44B. That is a controlled military-grade estrus-forcing agent, manufactured exclusively by Bennett Chemical Laboratories. It requires a Level 4 executive clearance to withdraw. The 5-minute countdown timer on the wall chimed softly as it reached 0. The amber status light on the titanium blast doors shifted to green, signaling that exterior locks were ready to cycle. Mariah looked at her older sister. Do we open the hall? No, Vesper answered. Transfer the hearing to the Sovereign High Chamber. Escort Dr. Vance to our private judicial suite. I pushed myself upright, stepping back from the dock railing. Your Honor, I cannot go to a private suite. I have an ongoing defense presentation. If I leave this courtroom without concluding my technical demonstration, the law allows the prosecution to enter a default judgment of guilt. Vesper looked at me. For the first time, the icy distance in her expression softened into something profound. Not pity, but deep, unyielding respect. Dr. Vance, Vesper said, 5 minutes ago, I entered an emergency judicial stay on these proceedings, pending an inquiry into witness tampering and biological coercion. While that stay is active, the prosecution cannot seek a default judgment, and no adverse ruling can be entered against you. I stared at her. And Bennett Aerospace? I also froze its corporate assets within this jurisdiction to preserve evidence and prevent obstruction, Vesper stated. She unclasped the heavy black velvet cape from her shoulders and held it out, waiting until I gave a small nod before draping it gently around my trembling frame. The fabric was cool, heavy, and smelled distinctly of dark slate, winter frost, and something ancient and protective. You are not going to a private suite to hide, Alira, Mariah said, stepping beside me and matching her stride to my slower pace. You are going there because you need a high-speed quantum terminal to finish destroying their evidence, and we intend to give you every tool you need. The Sovereign High Chamber occupied the topmost spire of the High Tribunal building, high above the smog and rain-drenched spires of the Central District. It was not a courtroom. It was a private fortress of dark oak, floor-to-ceiling panoramic glass, and wall-mounted cryptographic servers that hummed with quiet, lethal efficiency. Dr. Lauren Aris, the tribunal's chief medical examiner and a trusted Omega physician, met us at the private elevator. Within 20 minutes, she had replaced my sabotaged subdermal unit with a reinforced clinical blocker, administered a full detoxification IV, and bandaged the minor chemical burn on my collarbone. Your vitals have stabilized, Dr. Aris said, adjusting the IV drip stand beside the leather sofa where I sat. The synthetic compound was designed to induce maximum biological vulnerability within a 2-hour window. Had you been taken into custody by Lord Bennett's private security, the compound's secondary binding agent would have made you chemically receptive to his scent markers. A cold shudder ran through my core. A forced chemical imprint. Precisely, Calla said from across the room. She stood near a wide mahogany table covered in holographic projection pads, her amber eyes burning with indignation. Legally difficult to contest after the fact, and almost impossible to reverse without severe neurological trauma. They didn't just want your company, Elira. They wanted to erase your ability to testify against them forever. I pulled Vesper's heavy cape tighter around my shoulders, breathing in the steadying scent of slate and frost. The three sisters were positioned throughout the spacious chamber, and I noticed, with growing astonishment, the deliberate care with which they moved. Mariah stood near the perimeter balcony door, facing outward, keeping physical distance while securing the perimeter. Calla remained near the tea station, preparing a warm infusion of calming herbs. Vesper sat at the long conference desk, her posture immaculate, reviewing legal briefs on an encrypted datapad. None of them crowded me. None of them looked at me with the hungry, possessive gaze I had learned to fear from alphas in power. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, looking between the three sisters. "The Valerius family has maintained neutrality in the sovereign tribunal for 4 generations, intervening in a corporate dispute and freezing the assets of a major military contractor puts your judicial seats at risk." Vesper set down her datapad. She stood up and walked toward the center of the room, stopping several paces away from the sofa. "3 weeks ago," Vesper said quietly, "when your case was first assigned to our docket, the tribunal's automated genetic registry ran a routine compatibility screening on the presiding judges and the lead defense expert." My pulse jumped. The fated Bond algorithm. "Yes," Calla answered, bringing over a porcelain cup of herbal tea and setting it on the low table beside me. The algorithm registered a 99.8% harmonic resonance between your genetic markers and ours. A triple lineage sovereign bond. I stared at the steam rising from the tea, my throat suddenly tight. "You knew before today." "We knew within 4 minutes of the case assignment," Mariah said, turning from the balcony. Her voice was uncharacteristically gentle, and Vesper's very first action was to order the registry record encrypted and permanently sealed under judicial privilege. I looked up at the Chief Justice. "Why would you seal it?" "Under territory law, an alpha judge who discovers a compatible omega has the legal right to declare an immediate protective claim and halt adversarial proceedings. Because a genetic compatibility score is not consent," Vesper said, her gray eyes locking onto mine with absolute, unwavering clarity. "It is biology, nothing more. A statistical alignment of chromosomes does not give 3 strangers the right to claim your life, your mind, or your autonomy." "We read your technical treatises on quantum architecture," Calla added, a faint, genuine smile touching her lips. "Mariah spent 3 days reviewing the security protocols you designed for the municipal transit network. We did not want to meet you as judges, claiming a prize under an antiquated patriarchal law. We wanted you to know that your work was brilliant long before we ever spoke your name." The admission hit me harder than any threat could have. All my life, my designation had been treated as a liability, a weakness to be managed, or a prize to be traded. My former university mentors had told me to stay in the background because a female omega in cryptography made male alphas uncomfortable. Sean Bennett had viewed my intellect as an attractive novelty, to be owned and locked away in his private estate. Yet here, inside the highest seat of power in the city, 3 of the most feared women in the territory were standing back, treating my independence as something sacred. Before I could answer, a soft alert chimed from the master server terminal against the far wall. Calla turned to a second console. "I'm mirroring the lower registrar security archive and access camera feeds before anyone has a chance to purge them." Mariah crossed the room in 2 long strides, tapping the interface. The forensic trace on the courier service network just completed. The order to swap Alira's medical delivery originated from an internal terminal inside the courthouse. "Whose terminal?" Vesper demanded, her voice hardening instantly. "The terminal assigned to Deputy Chief Registrar Vance." "No, wait," Mariah corrected, her brow furrowing as she deciphered the code. "The routing header is masked with a recursive algorithm. It looks like an internal court account, but the underlying protocol is commercial." I set my teacup down and pushed the IV stand aside, standing up from the sofa. "Let me see it." Calla moved to support my elbow, but stopped herself mid-motion, holding her hand out palm up. "May I assist you to the terminal?" Yes, I said softly, resting my hand lightly over hers. Her touch was warm, steady, and sent a gentle current of reassurance through my tired muscles. I sat at the main terminal and pulled up the raw network telemetry. My fingers flew across the holographic keyboard, slipping back into the familiar, comforting rhythm of pure mathematics and cryptographic analysis. The attacker made a classic mistake, I murmured, splitting the data stream into 4 parallel hex dumps. They used a commercial encryption wrapper to hide their IP origin, but they forgot to strip the hardware entropy signature. Every silicon processor generates a unique microscopic voltage variation when compiling encrypted data. Vesper leaned over the console, her scent of cold slate and frost settling around me like a protective mantle. Can you isolate the hardware ID? I already have, I said, hitting a final execution key. A high-resolution equipment registration sheet populated the center screen. Hardware Asset ID, 994 Alpha Enterprise. Registered owner, Lord Sean Bennett, Bennett Consolidated. Device class, Private Executive Cryptographic Rig. Authorized user, Special Prosecutor Alistair Thorne. The room went completely silent. Thorne didn't merely abuse his office, Mariah whispered, a terrifying grin spreading across her face. He used Bennett's personal cryptographic rig inside the courthouse building to forge the delivery manifest and execute the blocker sabotage, which constitutes high treason, conspiracy to commit biological assault on an officer of the court, and falsification of sovereign records. Calla stated, her voice icy with legal finality. I leaned back in the high-backed leather chair, looking at the indisputable evidence glowing in front of us. They thought the heat would break my composure before I could finish analyzing the logs. If I collapsed in open court, Sean would have claimed emergency custody, Thorne would have entered a default conviction, and by tomorrow morning, my independent firm would belong to Bennett Consolidated. Vesper reached out, her gloved hand resting on the back of my chair, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from her frame, yet completely respectful of my space. The public gallery will reopen in 20 minutes, Vesper said, looking down at me. The city's major news networks are already broadcasting live from the courthouse steps. They believe you are incapacitated. I stood up, letting Vesper's heavy velvet cape drape over my shoulders with deliberate intent. Then let us go back down, I said, my voice steady, clear, and dangerous, and show them exactly what happens when an Omega defends her own name. When the private elevator doors opened into courtroom 9, the atmosphere inside the hall was electric with tension. The titanium blast doors had retracted into the ceiling. The acoustic glass partitions had returned to transparent clarity. The public gallery was packed to capacity, with over 500 spectators, journalists, and corporate representatives. Millions more were watching the live broadcast feeds, pulsing through the overhead holographic projectors. Prosecutor Thorne stood at his podium, a smug, triumphant expression plastered across his face. He had his closing motion already prepared in his hand. In the front row, Lord Sean Bennett sat with his legal team, adjusting his cufflinks, looking like a predator, preparing to feast on the remains of a fallen rival. May it please the court, Thorne began, raising his voice to capture the room's full attention. In light of the defendant's unfortunate and tragic medical collapse during cross-examination, the prosecution moves for an immediate declaration of sovereign incompetence and requests that Dr. Alira Vance be placed under the temporary guardianship of Bennett Consolidated. The side entrance to the judicial bench swung open with a resounding crack. Archon Vesper Valerius walked into the hall, her black robes flowing behind her like midnight wings. Archon Mariah and Archon Calla flanked her on either side, their faces carved from unforgiving granite, and walking directly between them, wearing the Chief Justice's velvet-trimmed cape and carrying an encrypted sovereign datapad, was me. A collective gasp echoed across the 500 people in the gallery. Cameras whirred. Flashbulbs erupted in a blinding cascade of light. Sean Bennett's smile vanished so fast it looked as if he had been struck across the face. Prosecutor Thorne stopped speaking mid-sentence, his papers fluttering in his trembling hands. I did not walk to the defense dock. I walked directly to the central well of the court, stopping before the grand podium of evidence. I stood straight, my head held high, my eyes locking directly onto Sean Bennett's pale, frozen face. Archon Vesper took her seat at the high center bench, her voice ringing out across the vast acoustic expanse of the chamber. "The motion for default judgment is denied," Vesper declared, her tone cutting through the silence like a diamond blade. "Dr. Vance is fully present, fully competent, and the court will now hear her final rebuttal." I connected my sovereign datapad to the central courtroom projection nexus. "Members of the tribunal," I began, my voice steady, sharp, and commanding the complete, unbroken attention of every person in the hall. "Earlier this morning, the prosecution claimed that my biometric credentials were used to steal classified propulsion algorithms from Bennett Aerospace. They also claimed that my physical distress was an unfortunate natural accident." I tapped the glass interface. A massive holographic schematic of the courthouse's internal environmental ventilation system lit up the ceiling. At 8:15 yesterday morning, an administrative dispatch order was executed through the tribunal courier service, I explained, enlarging the digital routing manifest. "That order diverted my legitimate prescription delivery and replaced it with a sealed package containing Compound 44B, an illegal hormonal accelerant designed to trigger an immediate, chemically induced estrus." The gallery exploded into furious whispers. Several senior council members in the upper tiers stood up in shock. "Outrageous!" Thorne shouted, sweating profusely through his high collar. "These are baseless, desperate fabrications from an unstable Omega." The dispatch order was encrypted using an asymmetric 16-node cipher, I continued, completely ignoring his outburst. The exact same cipher used in the alleged corporate theft. But whoever compiled this attack made a fatal technical error. They compiled the malware using a private terminal that leaves a distinct hardware voltage fingerprint. I swiped my hand across the interface. A glowing comparative graph filled the center of the room. 2 identical wave patterns matched with 100% mathematical alignment. The terminal used to steal the propulsion files, the terminal used to forge my biometric authorization, and the terminal used to sabotage my medication are all the exact same machine, I announced, turning slowly toward the gallery. "Hardware asset 994 Alpha Enterprise, registered to Lord Sean Bennett's private executive security inventory." Sean Bennett sprang from his seat, his face mottled with rage. "This is a lie! My systems are private. You have no authority to access my corporate telemetry." "She does not need authority when the evidence is presented under sovereign judicial warrant," Archon Mariah spoke, her voice thunderous as she stood from the bench. "And the terminal in question was physically operated within this very building yesterday morning by Special Prosecutor Alistair Thorne." Calla Valerius opened the security archive she had mirrored before the hearing resumed. On the massive display, crystal-clear footage from the registrar's lower office showed Thorne inserting a black encryption drive into the court terminal, cross-referencing my delivery schedule, and stamping the forged dispatch order. Thorne dropped his papers. They scattered across the floor, but he didn't bother to pick them up. His knees buckled, and he collapsed back into his chair, staring blankly at the evidence of his own ruin. "Lord Sean Bennett," Archon Vesper's voice echoed through the hall, carrying the absolute weight of sovereign law. "You are hereby charged with high conspiracy, corporate espionage, and aggravated biological assault." High tribunal wardens intercepted Bennett at the gallery doors, forcing him to his knees and snapping heavy containment cuffs around his wrists. The gallery erupted into an uproar of shouting journalists and flashing holocams. "Order!" Vesper's gavel struck the obsidian block once. Special Prosecutor Thorne is stripped of his license and remanded into custody. The 3 sisters descended the marble steps together and stopped in front of my podium. "Dr. Alira Vance," Vesper said clearly into the microphones, "all charges against you are dismissed with prejudice. Every seizure order against Veil cryptographic systems is vacated. Your legal personhood is affirmed without restriction, and your firm is restored to full independent standing, effective immediately." "Thank you, Your Honors," I said. Once the hearing was formally adjourned and Bennett and Thorne had been removed in restraints, Vesper asked me to join the sisters in the private anteroom behind the bench. The security detail remained outside. This time, there was no trial left to influence and no verdict left to shape. Calla placed an official parchment document bearing the golden embossed seal of the Sovereign High Court on the writing desk between us. "This is a judicial renunciation of sovereign claim," she explained. "It states that Vesper, Mariah, and I formally, legally, and permanently surrender any right to invoke a protective claim, marital conservatory, or automatic pack bond under the Genetic Compatibility Registry." I looked from the document to the three sisters. "You're waiving every automatic right the bond gives you?" "We are," Mariah said. "We never want the city, or you, to believe we protected you because we expected to own the life we saved." "Under this document," Vesper continued, her gray eyes softening, "you remain entirely sovereign. Veil Cryptographic Systems remains independent. You owe this court no gratitude, no obligation, and no romantic consideration. If you walk out of this courthouse today and never wish to see the three of us again, you will do so free of any claim from us." For years, every system that had offered me protection had hidden a price somewhere in the fine print. These three women were doing the opposite. They were stripping themselves of power before asking me for anything. Vesper signed first. Mariah followed without hesitation. Calla added the final signature and pressed the official seal into the wax. "It is recorded," Calla said softly. "You belong only to yourself, Elira." For the first time all day, the bond beneath my ribs hummed, not with the artificial fever of sabotage, but with a deep, quiet recognition that asked for nothing. "Thank you," I whispered. 6 months later, the morning sun rose over the glass spires of the Central District. Veil Cryptographic Systems belonged entirely to me. The Valerius sisters had formally recused themselves from every commercial decision involving my company. An independent sovereign procurement board had then conducted a blind technical review of the city's orbital grid security contract. Veil Cryptographic Systems won the 10-year agreement on score alone. A soft knock sounded at the office door. "Enter," I called out. Mariah Valerius stepped into the room with a bakery box. "Important strategic briefing," she announced. She opened the box to reveal 4 slightly uneven pastries. "You burned them," I observed. "They are tactically crisped," Mariah countered. Calla Valerius entered with a tray of tea. "It was an arson attempt," a cool voice spoke from the threshold. Vesper Valerius walked into the office. She stopped 2 paces from my desk and placed a small, velvet-lined wooden box in the center. "The Sovereign Council approved the final charter for the independent Omega Technical Registry," Vesper explained. "No court can ever mandate an alpha conservatorship again." "And these?" I asked, looking at the box. Inside lay 3 bands forged from dark Damascus steel, inlaid with blue quantum fiber. "6 months ago, we promised that you would never belong to anyone but yourself," Vesper said. "These 3 rings carry no legal authority. If we wear them, it will only be because you choose to let us walk beside you." I looked at the 3 extraordinary women who had given me freedom before they ever asked for my heart. True independence was not living in an empty room with a locked door. It was having the power to open the door and choosing exactly who was worthy of stepping inside. I took the 3 rings and slipped them onto their fingers. "No claims," I whispered. "No claims," Vesper repeated, wrapping her arms around me. "No ownership," Mariah said. "Only us," Calla finished. Outside, the city moved below us. Inside, 4 women stood together in the morning light, building a future on a promise spoken clearly and a love that was chosen.